When the dial tone cut off abruptly, the sound of the silence was more deafening than the storm battering the automatic windows of the clinic. I stood there with the phone pressed against my ear, unable to process the cruelty of the words I had just heard. My name is Genevieve, and at 68 years old, I had survived a vicious divorce that left me penniless at 40. I had built an import company from my kitchen table and had beaten pneumonia twice, but nothing, absolutely nothing in my life, had prepared me for the glacial cold I felt that night, and it wasn't from the hospital's air conditioning. Just 2 hours ago, the doctor had signed my discharge papers. It had been a scare, a cardiac arrhythmia triggered by stress, or so the doctors claimed. I knew it was the accumulated exhaustion of holding the world on my shoulders. I felt fragile, a sensation I despised with all my soul. My legs, usually steady and accustomed to walking through warehouses and corporate offices, trembled slightly under the weight of my own body. I looked at the clock on the waiting room wall. It was 8:15 at night outside. The sky was falling to pieces. It was one of those torrential downpours that turns the city into a chaos of red taillights and desperate honking. I dialed the number of my daughter, Lauren, with the certainty of someone calling for their lifeboat. She knew I had been admitted. I had texted her that very morning, though I only got a praying hands emoji in response. "Hello," she answered, using that distracted tone she always had when something else was holding her attention. "Lauren, it's me. They discharged me," I said, trying to keep my voice from sounding as weak as I felt. "Could you come pick me up? It's pouring out, and I don't feel very safe standing alone on the street waiting for a ride." There was a silence on the other end, not a silence of concern, but of annoyance. I heard the volume of the television in the background, a dramatic swell of violins that I recognized perfectly. "Oh, Mom, seriously? They discharged you right now?" She sighed, and I could picture her perfectly, lounging on her beige velvet sofa, the one I had bought her last Christmas. "I can't go, Mom. I'm watching my show. It's the season finale. Julian is finally going to find out the baby isn't his. I can't move." I blinked, confused. I thought I had misheard her. "Lauren, I am at the hospital. I feel dizzy," I insisted, clinging to my rapidly crumbling dignity. "Mom, please, don't be dramatic. You're discharged, which means you're fine. Order an Uber. You have more than enough money to pay for one of the black cars. I'll see you tomorrow." "Yeah, don't interrupt me anymore. I'm missing the dialogue." And she hung up. That final click echoed in my head like a gunshot. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at the black screen. My reflection stared back at me, a woman with perfectly styled gray hair, but with eyes full of a moisture that had nothing to do with the rain outside. I wasn't some helpless widow relying on the charity of her children. I was a divorced, independent woman who had chosen never to remarry, dedicating every minute and every dollar to this daughter, who now couldn't miss a fictional scene to pick up her sick mother. For years I had boasted about my strength, about not needing a man to change a light bulb or to invest in the stock market. But that night, standing in that sterile lobby smelling of bleach and medication, I felt like the loneliest woman on the planet. A young nurse named Ethan, according to his badge, was watching me from the front desk. He must have seen my face fall apart, seen the blood drain from my cheeks, leaving me pale as paper. "Miss Genevieve, are you feeling all right?" he asked, stepping out from behind his station. He was a sturdy kid with a baby face and large hands. "Yes, son, it's just that my ride couldn't make it." I lied. The shame burned the back of my throat. I couldn't admit to a stranger that my own daughter had discarded me for a television show. "It's an absolute downpour out there. Come on, I'll help you down the stairs and we'll get you a safe cab," he said, with a kindness that actually hurt, because that gentleness should have been coming from my own flesh and blood. We walked toward the exit. The cold wind hit us the second the automatic doors slid open. The water was bouncing violently off the asphalt. Ethan opened a massive umbrella and shielded me, neglecting himself entirely, soaking the shoulder of his white scrubs. "Wait right here under the awning. I'll flag one down," he shouted over the roar of the storm. I watched him run toward the avenue, waving his hand in the pouring rain. I hugged my leather handbag tight, a gift I had bought for myself when I closed my first major international contract. Inside that bag was my checkbook, my cards, the power that had allowed me to give Lauren the life of a queen. I thought about her monthly allowance. The famous little help that had morphed into a sacred obligation. Lauren was 40 years old, perfectly healthy, with a college degree I had paid for with blood, sweat, and tears. And yet, she lived off the allowance I transferred to her, without fail, on the 5th of every month. An obscene amount of money that allowed her to avoid work, live in an exclusive neighborhood, and apparently have enough free time to watch soap operas while her mother was recovering from a cardiac crisis. It's so she never has to go through what I went through, I would tell myself every time I authorized the wire transfer. It's so she can be happy. But Lauren's happiness had been built on the foundation of my sacrifice, and clearly, on the ruins of her respect for me. I hadn't raised a daughter. I had fed a parasite wearing designer clothes. A yellow cab pulled up to the ramp. Ethan waved me over. I walked with difficulty, leaning heavily on his firm arm. He helped me into the vehicle with exquisite care, shielding my head from the doorframe. "Take good care of yourself, Ms. Genevieve, and get some rest," he told me with a genuine smile before shutting the door. I thanked him with a small nod, completely unable to speak, because the knot in my throat was already unbearable. The cab smelled like synthetic pine and old dampness. The driver, an older man in a worn-out cap, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Where to, boss?" I rattled off my address on autopilot. The car pulled away, and then, in the total isolation of that back seat, with the rain blurring the city lights against the glass, I finally broke. It wasn't a loud, hysterical crying. It was a silent weep, the kind that physically aches in your chest, where the tears roll down hot and salty, right to the corners of your mouth. I cried for the little girl whose hair I used to braid before school. I cried for the teenager I comforted when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I cried for the grown woman whose divorce and apartment I paid for so she could get a fresh start. I cried because I realized the fault was mine. I had taught her that my love was unconditional, but I had also mistakenly taught her that my money and my presence were acquired rights, not privileges. I had taught her that I would always be there, no matter how terribly she treated me. But the Genevieve who walked into that hospital was not the same woman riding away in this cab. Something had fundamentally shifted the second I heard that television excuse. The pain in my chest was no longer cardiac. It was the death of an illusion, the illusion of being loved for who I am, and not for what I provide. I pulled my phone out again. My hands were no longer shaking. They were steady now, driven by a cold, calculating fury, the exact same fury I channeled in business whenever a supplier tried to scam me. I scrolled through my contacts. I didn't call Lauren. I would never call her to ask for anything ever again. I pulled up the number for Robert, my wealth manager at the bank. It was almost 9 at night, but clients in my portfolio tier had 24-hour direct access. "Hello, Miss Genevieve," Robert answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and professional. "Is everything all right? It's quite late." "Robert, I apologize for the hour," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly hard, metallic, even to my own ears. "I need you to make an urgent move on my accounts right this second." "Of course. Tell me, has there been fraud? Did you lose a card?" I looked out the window. We were passing a park where a mother was shielding her young son with her own coat to keep him dry. The image stung my soul, but it also cemented my decision. "No, Robert, it's not fraud. It's an administrative correction." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the cab. "I want you to cancel the automatic wire transfer scheduled for Lauren's account, the monthly one. Cancel it permanently." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Robert knew my finances better than anyone. He knew that money was my daughter's entire livelihood. "The full allowance, ma'am? Are you absolutely sure? You know it processes automatically in 2 days." "Completely sure, Robert. And is there anything else?" "Tell me." "The supplementary credit card in her name, the black card that charges to my primary account. Block it. Don't report it as stolen. Just cancel it flat out. I want it to stop working this exact second. Understood? I'm processing it through the system right now. Anything else?" "Yes." "If she calls the bank asking why her payments aren't going through, you tell her it is a direct order from the primary account holder, and any complaints need to be taken up with me. Don't give her any technical excuses. It's done, Miss Genevieve. Are you feeling all right? You sound different." "I am better than ever, Robert. Thank you." I hung up, The cab stopped at a red light. The rain hammered fiercely against the roof, a constant drumming that seemed to applaud my decision. I wiped my tears with the cloth handkerchief I always kept in my sleeve. There was no more sadness on my face, only the deep grooves of experience remained. I looked at my phone one last time. Not a single message from Lauren. Surely the show had ended by now, and she was probably eating dinner in peace, assuming her mother had already sorted out her little hospital drama. Assuming that on the 5th, like a Swiss watch, the money would appear in her account to pay for her gym, her outings, and her fantasy life. Poor delusional girl. She had no idea that the soap opera of her own life had just taken a brutal plot twist. She had chosen the fiction of television over the reality of my health. Perfect. Now she would have to face the reality of life without my safety net. The driver looked at me again through the mirror. "We're almost there, ma'am. It's raining too hard for you to get out alone." "Don't worry," I replied. And for the first time that night, I smiled. A crooked smile, devoid of joy, but full of power. I can get out alone. I have done everything alone my entire life, and it seems that's how it's going to stay. We pulled up to my house, an old estate I had restored with my own hands after the divorce. I paid the driver and gave him a generous tip, much more than the ride cost, simply because he had brought me back to my sanctuary. I walked into the house. The silence greeted me, but this time it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I took off my wet coat and hung it on the rack. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was beating at a perfect, rhythmic, strong pace. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one facing the soaked garden. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't need distractions. I needed to think, to plan, because canceling the allowance was only step one. Lauren had opened a door tonight with her indifference, but she hadn't realized that by opening it, she had awakened the ruthless businesswoman I had locked in a drawer to play the good mother. That mother, understanding and generous, had been left behind in the hospital waiting room. The woman sitting in the dim light of the living room right now, listening to the rain, was Genevieve, the master of her own destiny, and she had a very important lesson to teach. A lesson that, unfortunately, was arriving 40 years late, but would hit with the force of a hurricane. I closed my eyes and rested, knowing that tomorrow, when the sun came up and the banks opened, the real storm would begin for my daughter, and I would be right there with my umbrella, watching the rain fall. The next morning did not bring the regret that, deep in my motherly heart, a treacherous part of me was expecting. I woke up with my body stiff, not from the orthopedic hospital bed, but from the tension of having slept in my own home, with one eye open, waiting for a message, a call, a smoke signal from Lauren. But the phone, resting on the mahogany nightstand, remained in absolute black silence. I got out of bed with deliberate slowness, my joints cracked, reminding me of the 68 years I was carrying, but my mind was incredibly sharp. The fog of anxiety and the fear of death that had ridden with me in the ambulance the day before had vanished, replaced by a cold, metallic clarity, identical to the feeling I got right before walking into a brutal negotiation with Chinese or German suppliers. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee. As the bitter aroma filled the kitchen, I looked out the window at the garden. The storm had passed, leaving broken branches and mud puddles in its wake. That's exactly how my life looks, I thought. A natural disaster had leveled the fiction of the perfect family I had invented for myself, and now it was time to clean up the mess. I didn't go to the living room. Instead, I walked down the hall toward a room that had been closed for months, my home office. I turned the key in the lock, and the smell of old books and waxed wood hit me instantly. This was my sanctuary. Right there, sitting at that solid oak desk I bought at an auction, I had built my empire. Right there, I had cried over my divorce, signing papers in absolute rage, and right there I had plotted the expansion of my company when everyone said a single woman couldn't handle steel imports. I sat down in the leather swivel chair. The leather creaked under my weight, a familiar and comforting sound. It was the sound of power. "All right, Genevieve," I said out loud, my voice bouncing off the walls, lined with diplomas and awards. "Let's see how much your daughter's love actually costs." I turned on the old desktop computer, though I preferred doing this the old-fashioned way, with pen and paper. I opened the bottom drawer of the metal filing cabinet, where I kept the physical duplicate bank statements the bank mailed me for security. Robert, my manager, always told me to just use online banking, but I didn't trust the cloud. I preferred to touch the evidence. I pulled out the folders labeled Lauren Expenses and Lauren Apartment. They were heavy. They felt as heavy as a tombstone. For the last decade, I had been signing checks and authorizing transfers with a blindfold on. I did it out of guilt. Guilt for having worked so much when she was a little girl. Guilt over the divorce. Guilt for not being the cookie-baking mother she wanted. Money was my way of apologizing. But this morning, with my reading glasses on and a red pen in my hand, the blindfold hit the floor. I began the audit. The first page I reviewed was the statement for the black card I had canceled the night before. My eyes widened in pure disbelief as I scanned the line items. L'Etoile Restaurant, $450. Luxury Spa and Boutique, Clothing, $1,200. Platinum Gym Subscription, $350. The list went on. There were charges at liquor stores, electronics shops, and a high-end dog grooming salon for a dog I didn't even know she owned. I added up the numbers on the large key calculator resting on my desk. The final total for just the last month was obscene. It was more than 3 working-class families made together in an entire month, and I had paid it without a single complaint, thinking, poor thing, she needs a distraction. I felt a sudden wave of nausea, but it wasn't physical, it was moral. I realized I wasn't subsidizing basic needs. I wasn't paying her electric bill or her gas. I was financing a celebrity lifestyle for a 40-year-old woman who didn't know what it meant to earn a single dollar. I turned you into a monster, my girl, I muttered, drawing a furious red line across the total. And I was Dr. Frankenstein. But the real revelation, the hidden asset I had completely forgotten I possessed, surfaced when I opened the second folder, the one for the apartment. 15 years ago, when Lauren became independent, a word that now felt like a sick joke, I bought her a penthouse in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. She always referred to that place as her house. I always let her call it that. I pulled out the original deeds, yellowed by time. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded them, not from weakness, but from anticipation. I read the legal clauses, that fine print nobody ever reads, but that I, as a good businesswoman, always memorized. And there it was, the crown jewel. The nuclear weapon I didn't even remember arming. The apartment was not in Lauren's name. Back then, my lawyer, an old fox named Arthur, had advised me, Ms. Genevieve, you never know where life takes you. Put it in your name and give it to her in a free-use lease. That way she lives there for free, but the property is yours. If she marries a deadbeat, they can't take a dime. I had agreed, solely to protect her from a potentially bad husband. I never imagined I would have to use that document to protect myself from her. The paper clearly stated, legal owner, Genevieve Almazan. Beneficiary, Lauren Almazan. Revocation clause, immediate, at the owner's discretion. I brought my hand to my mouth, holding back a laugh that sounded more like a dry sob. Lauren lived in a house that wasn't hers. She drove a car that was registered to my company. She used credit cards that relied entirely on my signature. She owned nothing. Absolutely nothing was hers. Her independence was a house of cards built on my back, and I had just blown it down. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the power flow through my veins again, hot and invigorating. For years I had been tame. I had been the mother hen lowering her head while her chick pecked away. I accepted her slights, her I don't have time right nows, her you're so old-fashioned moms, her absences on my birthdays, her forgetting Mother's Day. I accepted being a walking ATM. But that tame woman had died last night on the wet pavement outside the hospital, standing under the umbrella of a stranger. I looked over at the bookshelf where I kept my old business journals. I stood up and grabbed one at random, the one from 1998, the year I almost lost the company to a brutal economic crash. I opened it and read a sentence I had written in the middle of the despair of that era. When the ship is sinking, you throw the unnecessary cargo overboard. Survival isn't cruelty, it's necessity. I slammed the book shut. Dust danced in the beam of sunlight streaming through the window. Lauren was unnecessary cargo. Not her as a person. She was still my daughter and I loved her, but her dependency, her ingratitude, her total paralysis in life. If I wanted to save her, if I wanted to save whatever was left of our relationship, before resentment consumed me entirely, I had to let her sink. I had to let her hit rock bottom so she could finally learn how to swim. The house phone rang at that exact moment. The shrill noise shattered the monastic silence of the office. I stared right at it. I didn't have caller ID on that old rotary model, but I knew exactly who it was. My gut was screaming it. It was 10 in the morning, the exact time Lauren usually woke up, made her green juice, and checked her online shopping carts. The exact time she had undoubtedly tried to use the card to order breakfast delivery, only to have it declined. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3 rings. I pictured her face, the initial confusion, the furrowed brow. Why isn't it going through? Mom always pays the bill. The irritation rising. 4, 5. I reached out my hand, but not to pick it up. I unplugged the phone cord straight from the wall. The ringing stopped instantly. Not today, Lauren, I said to the empty room. Today is Sunday for me, and on Sundays, management does not take complaints. I walked back to my desk and pulled out a sheet of heavy, elegant letterhead with my initials embossed in gold, the kind I used for formal letters to embassies or business partners. I uncapped my fountain pen, a Mont Blanc I had gifted myself for my 50th birthday. The black ink flowed onto the paper with a lethal elegance. I began to write, not a love letter, but an inventory, a detailed breakdown of exactly what was ending. I wasn't going to send it yet. It was for me. It was my battle plan. 1. Cancellation of monthly allowance. Executed. 2. Cancellation of supplementary credit cards. Executed. 3. Recovery of corporate vehicle. BMW 3 Series. Pending. 4. Eviction notice for termination of free use lease. On standby. Writing those words terrified me, yes, but it also brought me a bizarre sense of peace. It was like cutting out gangrenous tissue. It hurt, but it was the only way to stop the infection from killing me. I remembered last night Lauren's voice saying, Julian is finally going to find out the baby isn't his. The irony was delicious. She was so worried about the fictional truth of a soap opera that she didn't see the crushing truth of her own reality coming right at her. I grabbed my contact book. I needed an ally. I couldn't do all of this alone. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I needed witness. I needed ironclad legality. I dialed Arthur's personal cell phone number. It was Sunday, but he owed me favors dating back to the 90s. Genevieve, he answered, his voice rough, probably just waking up. Did something happen? You never call on a Sunday unless the world is burning. The world isn't burning, Arthur, but I am about to set fire to a piece of it, I replied firmly. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning in my home office. Bring the original deeds for the Fifth Avenue property. The penthouse? Lauren's place? He asked, and I could hear the immediate caution in his tone. Genevieve, are you absolutely sure? You know this is going to start a war. It's not a war, Arthur. It's a lesson. And yes, I am absolutely sure. Bring the paperwork for the car too, and draft up an employment contract. An employment contract? For who? For my daughter, I said, a bitter smile curving my lips. If she wants money, she is going to have to earn it. I want to offer her a position at the warehouse. Entry level, minimum wage, full-time hours. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Arthur had known Lauren since she was a little girl in pigtails. He knew she had never lifted anything heavier than a champagne flute. Genevieve, she won't last a single day. She's going to be deeply offended. She is going to hate you. Let her hate me, I declared, watching the sunlight pour through the window. I would rather she hate me as a useful woman than love me while waiting for me to die so she can inherit. I'll see you tomorrow at 8, Arthur. Don't be late. I hung up. I stared at the cell phone I had left in the kitchen, but which I now went to retrieve. I had 14 missed calls from Lauren and 5 text messages. I opened the texts, feeling a morbid curiosity. 10:15 a.m. Mom, what's going on with the card? It got declined on Uber Eats. So embarrassing. 10:20 a.m. Mom, pick up. Are you okay? Did something happen at the hospital? Oh, now she cared about the hospital, now that the money was failing. 10:45 a.m. I called the bank and they said you canceled everything. This is a joke, and it's not funny. 11 a.m. Mom, this is ridiculous. I need to go to the grocery store and I have no cash. Fix this right now. 11:15 a.m. I'm coming over to your house. We need to talk. I read the final message and felt a chill. I'm coming over. Fine. Let her come. I walked to the downstairs bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. The dark circles were still there, but my eyes were shining with a fierce determination. I fixed my hair, applied a little terracotta lipstick, and changed out of my robe into an elegant but comfortable silk blouse and trousers. I put on my pearls. I wasn't going to receive her in my pajamas. I wasn't going to receive her like a sick old woman. I was going to receive her as the owner of this house, as the matriarch, as the CEO of this broken family. I walked back to the office and strategically arranged the documents on my desk. The bank statement with the superfluous expenses underlined in red dead center. The apartment deeds to the right, visible but closed. I went to the kitchen and brewed another cup of coffee. As I waited, I heard the sound of an engine outside. It wasn't a cab. It was the smooth purr of the BMW that I paid for. I heard the door slam. I heard her heels clicking aggressively against the stone walkway leading to the entrance. The doorbell rang insistently. 1, 2, 3 times, followed by heavy knocking on the wood. "Mom, open up! I know you're in there. The car is in the garage." I walked slowly toward the door. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. It was pure adrenaline. It was the exact same feeling I got right before firing a dishonest employee. I didn't open it immediately. I let her knock a little longer. I let her desperation marinate for a minute. I took a deep breath. I remembered the rain from last night. I remembered Ethan the nurse, getting soaked just to get me a cab. I remembered the total isolation of the back seat. "I'm coming," I whispered to myself. "The show is over. Lauren, welcome to the real world." I turned the knob and pulled the door open. Lauren stood there, her face flushed red with anger, her phone gripped tight in her hand, wearing designer athleisure wear that cost more than my first office space. She glared at me with a mixture of fury and utter bewilderment. "What exactly is your problem?" she yelled before even saying hello. "Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? They declined my card over a $20 smoothie. I stood my ground in the threshold, blocking the entrance with my body. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. I simply looked at her with a calm that visibly threw her off balance. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft but dripping with ice. "I'm glad to see your show is over, because my shift is just starting." Lauren blinked, totally confused by my tone. She opened her mouth to snap back, to launch into another one of her routine complaints, but something in my posture stopped her dead. Maybe it was the way I was standing, back completely straight, chin held high. Or maybe it was the look in my eyes, a look she hadn't seen in decades, the look of the woman who had built an empire from absolutely nothing. "Come in," I finally said, stepping aside. "We need to go over some numbers, and I don't think you're going to like them." Lauren blew into the house like a Category 5 hurricane, dragging in the smell of rain, imported French perfume, and that highly specific indignation reserved only for people who have never been told the word no. Her red-soled heels clattered sharply against the hardwood floor of the foyer, a high, authoritative sound that, years ago, would have sent me running to cater to her every need. But I wasn't running anymore. I stood perfectly still by the open door, watching her with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying an exotic, dangerous species. "It is unbelievable, Mom," she exclaimed, tossing her designer bag onto the antique credenza that had belonged to my grandmother. The cashier looked at me like I was a criminal. "Insufficient funds," the little machine said. I, Lauren Almazan, had to leave my order on the counter and run out. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? I closed the door gently. The click of the deadbolt sounded entirely final, locking her tantrum inside my four walls. "Humiliation is a very interesting emotion, Lauren," I said, walking slowly toward the living room, forcing her to trail behind me. "Sometimes, it's highly educational." She stopped dead in her tracks, pulling off her oversized sunglasses to glare at me, her brow deeply furrowed. Her eyes, identical to her father's, scanned me, searching for the usual apology, the emergency check, the comforting embrace. She found absolutely none of it. "What are you talking about? Did you call the bank?" It was probably a system error because it's the end of the month or something. Robert is completely incompetent. I've always told you that. You really need to switch to a more exclusive private banking tier. I sat down in my single armchair, crossed my legs, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I stared straight at her. Sit down. The tone of my voice was not a suggestion. It was an executive order. Lauren, completely thrown by my lack of panic, dropped onto the sofa across from me, huffing like a grounded teenager. I am in a rush, Mom! I have an appointment with Dr. Vance at noon, and I need you to give me another card or some cash. I can't be late. He charges for the consultation even if you don't show up. Then Dr. Vance will just have to wait, I replied with glacial calm. And regarding Robert, he didn't make any mistake. I was the one who ordered the block. Lauren let out a nervous laugh, short and high-pitched. You? Why would you do that? Did your account get hacked? Oh my God, Mom. I told you to stop opening weird emails. Nobody hacked me, Lauren. I canceled your cards, and I stopped your monthly allowance because I am conducting an audit, a restructuring of my assets. And you, my dear, are my most expensive liability. She looked at me like I was speaking ancient Aramaic. The word liability did not exist in her emotional vocabulary. To her, money was like oxygen, invisible, omnipresent, and a birthright. I don't understand anything. Are you mad about yesterday? She asked, lowering her guard a fraction, though the annoyance still pulsed in her voice. Mom, please, don't hold a grudge. I already told you I was watching the season finale. I couldn't pause it. It was live. Besides, they discharged you. Look at you. You're perfectly fine. You actually look tougher. Tougher. I repeated the word, tasting it. Yes, I suppose wet pavement and total isolation will toughen anyone up. Oh, stop being so dramatic. Come on, forgive me, okay? She pressed her hands together in a theatrical pleading gesture she had perfected at age 5 to get candy. I promise, next time I'll come get you, even if I'm watching the Oscars. Now, can you please unblock the card? Seriously, I need to get to the dermatologist. In that exact moment, I felt the absolute certainty that my plan was completely necessary. There wasn't an ounce of actual remorse in her eyes. There was only a rush. A rush to get back to her fantasy life, entirely funded by my sweat. I stood up and walked over to the small desk in the corner of the living room, where I had left a small notepad. Not the heavy folders from the office. I was saving those for the final blow. Right now, I just needed to play a little, to pull the string tight and see how far it would stretch before snapping. Before we talk about unblocking anything, I need you to clarify a few charges for me. I lied. I didn't need anything clarified. I knew where every single cent went, but I wanted to watch her squirm. I wanted to hear her absurd justifications. I picked up the notepad and pretended to read. Last month, there's a charge for $1,200 in wine and liquor at the Oak Room. Can you explain that? You don't drink that much, or at least I didn't think you did. Lauren adjusted her hair, visibly uncomfortable. Oh, that was for Chloe's penthouse housewarming party. I couldn't just show up empty-handed. Mom, I bought a few cases of champagne. It's social investment. You're the one who always says you have to maintain public relations. I see. Social investment, I noted mentally. And the $450 at Paws and Luxury? As far as I know, your dog eats kibble, not caviar. It's for Toby's aromatherapy treatment, she exclaimed, highly offended, looking at me like I was an uncultured barbarian. He's been really stressed lately because of the construction noise next door. He needed to relax. I kept my face completely deadpan, even though inside I was fighting a mix of hysterical laughter and the urge to vomit. Aromatherapy for a dog. While her mother walked out of a hospital alone in the pouring rain, the disconnect from reality was absolute. I understand. Stress is terrible. I know all about it, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Yesterday, for example, I experienced a lot of stress when my heart gave out and there was no one there to take me home. Maybe I should have gone to Paws and Luxury. Lauren rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. Here we go again. Mom, I will make it up to you, okay? Sunday, I'll take you out to lunch. I'll pay. Well, you'll pay, but I'll pick the place and keep you company. Deal? It was fascinating. She genuinely believed her presence was a gift, a currency she could use to purchase my financial backing. She thought I was doing all of this just to get her attention. A lonely old woman's tantrum that could be fixed with lunch and some cheap flattery. She had no idea that I no longer wanted her bought and paid for company. "Let's do this, Lauren," I said, snapping the notepad shut. "I'm not unblocking the cards today." "What?" Her face fell apart. "But I have things to do. The bank's system takes 24 hours to process an unblock request." I lied again, with a fluidity that surprised me. Years of negotiating with corporate sharks had taught me how to lie using the truth. "But I won't leave you stranded." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $50 bill and two 20s. I smoothed them out on the coffee table. "Here, $90. That should be enough to cover an Uber back to your place and grab some groceries. No restaurants today." She stared at the bills like they were dirty napkins. "This is a joke. This won't even cover Dr. Vance's consultation fee, let alone gas for the SUV." "Then cancel the consultation. And as for the SUV, well, I hope you have a full tank. If not, you'll have to learn how to use the subway. I hear it's very efficient." Lauren jumped up from the sofa, her face turning crimson with rage. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing me like a little kid." "I am 40 years old, Mom." "Exactly," I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through her yelling. "You are 40 years old. By your age, I had lost a house, survived a divorce, founded a company, and was paying for your elite private schools. When I was your age, I wasn't begging for dog aromatherapy money. I was generating it." There was a tense silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30 with its monotonous ticking. Lauren stared at me with a mix of hatred and sheer confusion. I had never spoken to her like this. I had always been the enabler, the mother who softened every blow life tried to deal. "You're acting crazy," she muttered, snatching the bills off the table with a sharp jerk and shoving them into her designer bag. "It's probably whatever meds they put you on. They're messing with your head." "Maybe," I conceded, smiling faintly. "Or maybe the meds finally cleared my vision. Whatever, I'm leaving. I don't have time for your moral lectures today. You fix this with the bank tomorrow, you hear me? I can't live like this. I have commitments." She marched toward the door, her heels slamming into the floorboards. Right before walking out, she spun around. "Oh, and just so you know, the show was amazing. Julian is the father. In the end, everything always works out. Always." And she slammed the door behind her. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the engine of my BMW, because it was mine, even if she drove it, roar to life in the driveway and speed off. "In the end, everything always works out," she had said. Poor delusional girl. She really thought life had lazy writers just like her soap operas. She thought the status quo was unbreakable. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hands weren't shaking at all. I felt bizarrely invigorated, as if I had just taken off a corset that had been crushing my ribs for decades. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. I had left her with doubt, with deep discomfort, but still clinging to the false security that this was all temporary. She thought it was a one-day punishment. I knew it was the beginning of the end of her parasitic life. I walked back to my office. Arthur, my lawyer, would be here tomorrow, but I needed to get ahead of the work. I pulled out a brand new folder, one I hadn't shown Lauren. I labeled it in my firm, cursive handwriting, Plan B, Asset Recovery. I started drafting emails. I didn't send them yet. I left them sitting in my drafts folder, locked and loaded, ready to be fired like cannonballs at the exact right moment. The first was to the real estate agency that managed the building where Lauren lived. I knew the owner of the agency. He was an old friend. Subject, property inspection, penthouse 4. "George, I need you to schedule an emergency inspection of the penthouse to evaluate conditions for sale or rental to third parties. Keep this strictly confidential for the next 48 hours. The second email was for the HR manager at my own company, a fiercely loyal guy who had started out loading boxes 20 years ago. Subject, warehouse vacancy. Carl, I need you to open up a general warehouse assistant position at the North facility. Morning shift, minimum base salary, strictly by the book, 0 privileges. The candidate will report to you on Tuesday. Typing that email physically hurt my chest. I pictured Lauren, with her acrylic nails and delicate clothes, standing in the middle of all that dust and cardboard. It hurt the mother inside me, the instinct that wants to shield her cub from all harm. But then I remembered the rain. I remembered I'm watching my show. I remembered the utter disgust in her voice a few minutes ago when she looked at those $90. Pain is the best teacher, I thought, repeating the exact phrase my own father used to say when I fell off my bike. Lauren had never fallen off her bike. I had always thrown pillows on the ground first. It was time to take the pillows away and let her feel the concrete. I spent the afternoon organizing paperwork, reviewing insurance policies, and updating my will. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance. It would no longer go 100% to Lauren. I set up a trust fund with brutal stipulations. She would only see a dime if she could prove she had held steady employment for 2 consecutive years, and if she passed monthly drug tests. The rest of my estate would go to a scholarship foundation for female entrepreneurs. If I dropped dead tomorrow, Lauren wasn't inheriting an empire to blow on spas and parties. She was inheriting an opportunity, nothing more. By late afternoon, the house phone rang again. I had plugged it back in. I let the answering machine do its job. "Mom, it's me!" Lauren's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding irritated, backed by the heavy noise of traffic. "Those $90 didn't cover anything. I had to put gas in the SUV, and now I have zero money for dinner. This isn't funny anymore. Pick up the phone." I listened to the message while sipping a cup of chamomile tea, staring out the window at the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky a violent, bruised orange. "It's not funny, my girl," I whispered to the machine. "It's life, and life charges a heavy toll." I didn't pick up the receiver. I didn't call her back to wire funds. I held my ground, sitting in the dim light, fighting every ancient maternal instinct inside me that screamed to fix her problems. It was a silent torture, a war against my own biology, which had been totally warped by guilt and money. I ate a light dinner that night, a vegetable soup I made myself, savoring the deep quiet of my house. I didn't feel alone. I felt accompanied by my reclaimed dignity. I went to bed early. I needed to rest. Tomorrow was the day of revelation. Tomorrow, Arthur would bring the legal documents that would turn my words into irrevocable facts. Tomorrow, Lauren would take the hardest hit of reality she had ever experienced in her life. As I settled under the cool sheets, I thought about Ethan the nurse. I thought about his totally selfless kindness. And I thought about Lauren, who was probably sitting in her luxury apartment, which legally belonged to me, eating some cheap sandwich, absolutely furious, blaming me for her momentary misfortune, completely unaware that the roof over her head was about to vanish. I smiled in the dark, a sad smile, but a necessary one. I had spent years building a fortress of money around my daughter, so nothing could ever touch her. Now, with my own 2 hands and a crushing ache in my soul, I was tearing that wall down brick by brick, so that finally, the sunlight and the freezing rain could reach her, and hopefully, force her to grow. I closed my eyes. I slept better than I had in 20 years. The trap was set, the stage was ready. All I needed was for the lead actress to show up for her final performance. Monday morning broke, with an insulting brightness, a blinding sun that pierced through the heavy drapes of my office, mocking the emotional hurricane that was about to hit inside these 4 walls. Arthur, my lawyer for decades, arrived precisely at 8, with his battered leather briefcase and the weary expression of an old hound smelling trouble. He sat across from me, stirring his coffee with an agonizing slowness, actively avoiding my gaze. "Genevieve," he finally said, dropping the spoon onto the saucer with a sharp clink. "Are you absolutely certain about this? Legally, it's flawless, it's bulletproof, but morally, it's a nuclear bomb. You are about to put your daughter on the street." I held his gaze without flinching. My hands rested flat on the oak desk, fingers laced together, rock steady. There was no tremor in my hands, only the absolute coldness of someone who has made a life or death call. "Morally, Arthur, I've spent 20 years raising a completely useless human being," I replied, my voice bone dry. The nuclear bomb already went off Saturday night, when my heart failed and she chose to watch television. What we are doing today is not an attack, it's a rescue operation. And in a rescue, Sometimes you have to break a few bones to save the life. Arthur nodded in grim resignation. He pulled out the documents. 3 manila folders, perfectly aligned. The employment contract, the credit card revocation, and the heaviest one of all, the eviction notice. Lauren arrived 20 minutes late. I heard the SUV's engine in the driveway, followed by the heavy slam of the car door. She barged into the house without knocking. Just like always, her heels echoing down the hallway. She was wearing massive designer sunglasses, probably to hide the bags under her eyes from a night without air conditioning or gourmet takeout, and she was dressed in a matching athleisure set that cost more than my warehouse staff made in a month. She stormed into the office with the pure arrogance of someone walking in to claim a throne they believe is theirs by divine right. The second she saw Arthur, she froze, ripping the sunglasses off her face with a dramatic flare, her brow deeply furrowed. "Arthur, what are you doing here so early?" she asked, shooting me a highly suspicious glare. "Mom, I told you I was coming over for breakfast and to pick up the new cards. I didn't know you had a meeting. I'll wait outside, or is this going to be quick?" "Sit down, Lauren," I ordered, pointing to the empty leather chair next to the lawyer. There was zero warmth in my voice. None of the conciliatory sweetie tone I usually employed. It was the exact tone I used with distributors trying to sell me defective freight. She huffed, the annoyance practically vibrating at the corners of her mouth, but she obeyed. She dropped into the chair, crossing her legs and conspicuously checking her watch. "I am in a rush. Seriously, the gym is going to charge me a late fee if I miss Pilates. All right, what's the issue with the bank? Arthur, tell my mother to stop playing financial detective." Arthur cleared his throat, clearly miserable, and opened the first folder. "Lauren, your mother has asked me to formally notify you of a complete restructuring of her family assets and liabilities." "In English?" she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "In English," I cut in, leaning forward across the desk. "It means it's over, Lauren. The faucet has been turned off permanently." Lauren let out a nervous little laugh, a bubble of pure disbelief that popped in the dead silence of the room. "Oh, Mom, please. I get the point. You're hurt about the hospital thing. I apologize, okay? I'll buy you some flowers. I'll take you out to lunch. Once you unblock my account, obviously. Just drop the drama." "It is not drama. It is financial reality," I said, sliding the first sheet of paper across the desk toward her. "As of this exact moment, your monthly allowance of $5,000 is permanently canceled. The supplementary Amex and Visa cards have been terminated. Your premium health insurance will remain active until the end of the year, purely because I don't want you dropping dead if you get sick, but the deductible is entirely your responsibility." Lauren stared at the paper, then back at me, her arrogant smile slowly sliding off her face, replaced by a look of genuine, terrifying confusion. "Are you serious right now? How am I supposed to live? I don't have any savings. You told me not to worry about saving. You told me to invest in my image. I told you to invest in yourself, in your education, in your future. You translated that into handbags and shoes. But don't worry, I am not leaving you without options." I gave Arthur a slight nod. He slid the second folder across the desk. "Here is your solution," I said calmly. "It is an employment contract. The position is logistics assistant at the North Warehouse. Hours are Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. The salary is $3,200 a month, plus standard state benefits. It includes a grocery stipend." Lauren picked up the contract like it was an infected rag. She read the header, and her eyes blew wide open. Her face drained from indignant red to the pale white of a mortal insult. "Warehouse assistant?" she stammered, her voice literally strangling in her throat. "You are offering me a job as a box lugger? I have a bachelor's degree in international relations, Mom. I am your daughter. A degree you haven't used in 15 years. I fired back, completely relentless. "And in my company, everyone starts at the bottom. I started out loading boxes. If you want money, you are going to earn it with the sweat off your own brow, not mine. Sign the bottom line, and tomorrow morning you report for duty wearing steel-toed boots." Lauren shot out of her chair, knocking it backward. The sound was sharp, violent. "You are out of your mind!" she screamed, and I could literally see the veins bulging in her neck. "This is humiliating. I am not working in a filthy warehouse with people like that. I would rather starve to death." "That is your choice. I said, not raising my voice a single decibel. But before you go starve to death in your luxury penthouse, there is one final piece of business to handle. Arthur, looking physically ill, opened the third folder. It was the final one. The nuke. Sit down, Lauren, Arthur said, his voice quiet. Please, I am not sitting down. I am going home. And don't bother looking for me, Mom, because you aren't going to find me until you snap out of this senile delusion. You don't have a home, I said. The 4 words hung suspended in the air, heavy as cinder blocks. Lauren stopped halfway to the door, turning around with agonizing slowness. Her expression was a chaotic mix of pure rage and sudden primal fear. What did you just say? I said you don't have a home. The penthouse on 5th Avenue never belonged to you. Of course it's mine. You gave it to me when I turned 25. I picked out the furniture. I painted the walls. I paid for the furniture, and I paid for the paint. I corrected her, lifting the original, yellowed deeds. Legally, the property is entirely in my name. You merely had a free use lease agreement, a temporary loan, and this morning, in front of a notary, I completely revoked that agreement. Lauren stumbled back toward the desk, swaying slightly, as if the hardwood floor had suddenly turned to liquid beneath her feet. She snatched the document right out of Arthur's hands and read it frantically. Her eyes darted from line to line, desperately searching for a lie, a typo, a loophole, anything to save her. She found absolutely nothing. Immediate revocation due to gross ingratitude and owner's necessity, she read aloud, her voice shattering on the final syllable. Ingratitude. Mom, are you taking my house away because I didn't pick you up from the hospital? I didn't answer right away. I stood up, forcing her to face me at eye level. I felt massive. I felt incredibly powerful, even though inside, my mother's heart was bleeding out. I am taking the house away because you turned it into a cave where you hide from reality. I am taking it away because while you have a $2 million roof guaranteed over your head, you can't even appreciate a cab ride in the pouring rain. Lauren dropped the papers. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The arrogance, that designer armor that shielded her from the world, completely disintegrated in a matter of seconds. I saw the terrified little girl. I saw the spoiled teenager, and finally, I saw the petrified grown woman who had never, ever had to solve a real problem in her entire life. You can't do this to me, she whispered, the tears finally spilling over. Not her usual, manipulative, crocodile tears. These were tears of pure, unadulterated panic. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have any money. I don't have anyone. My friends, they aren't going to take me in if I have nothing. You have 30 days, I said, glancing at the calendar on the wall. You have exactly 1 month to vacate the premises. You can sell your furniture, your designer clothes, your jewelry. That will give you more than enough cash to rent something modest and start over. Or you can accept the warehouse job. If you take the job, I will allow you to stay in the apartment for 6 more months, paying a symbolic rent. Mom, please, she screamed, lunging across the desk and grabbing my hands. Her fingers were freezing cold, clammy with sweat. I am so sorry. I swear to God I will never watch another show in my life. I'll take care of you. I'll be the best daughter. Just please don't take my home. Don't make me work manual labor. They'll eat me alive. I looked deep into her eyes, those heavily made-up eyes that were now a complete disaster of running mascara. I felt her absolute desperation, her visceral, gut-wrenching terror of losing her status, of becoming a nobody. And it hurt me. God knows how much it hurt me. I wanted to pull her into my arms, tell her it was all a cruel prank, write her a fat check, and send her to the spa. But I remembered Ethan the nurse. I remembered the total isolation. I remembered that I was not going to live forever. If I dropped dead today, Lauren would end up on the street in less than a year, completely devoured by debt and con artists. I had to play the villain in her story today, so she could finally become the hero of her own life tomorrow. I pulled my hands out of her grip, gently but firmly, and I took a step back. This isn't about the television show, Lauren. This is about your life. You are 40 years old and you are a child, and I am far too old to be raising children anymore. She stood completely paralyzed, her hands still reaching out toward empty space. Her breathing was jagged, broken by heavy choking sobs. Arthur stared at the floor, totally unable to witness the absolute demolition of my daughter's ego. "But what about the car?" she asked, her voice barely a thread, desperately clinging to the very last scrap of her old life. "The BMW belongs to the company," I replied, merciless. "If you don't take the warehouse job, you hand over the keys today. If you do take the job, you can use it to commute, but you pay for your own gas." Lauren stared at me with a cocktail of pure, unfiltered hatred and absolute terror. It was a look I will never, ever forget. A look that screamed, "You are a monster. I hate you," she hissed. It was a guttural, visceral sound, dripping with venom. "You are a bitter, vindictive old woman. I wish you had died in that hospital." The blow was brutal. I felt like I had been physically struck across the face. Arthur shot up from his chair, completely outraged, but I held up a single hand to stop him. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't step back. I absorbed her hatred. I let it sink right into my chest, and I converted it into fuel. "Maybe," I said, with a terrifying calm that shocked even me. "But I am alive, and you are broke. You have 30 days, Lauren. The clock is ticking." She held my gaze for one more agonizing second, desperately searching for a crack in my armor. Finding absolutely nothing, she let out a blood-curdling scream of frustration, snatched her bag, and bolted out of the office. I listened to her heels stumbling down the hallway, the violent slam of the front door, and seconds later, the roar of the car engine peeling out of the driveway at top speed. The silence aggressively reclaimed the room. A thick, heavy silence, choked with dust and massive consequences. I collapsed back into my chair, feeling the adrenaline completely drain out of my system, leaving me utterly exhausted, my bones aching worse than they ever had in my life. Arthur let out a massive sigh and closed the folders. "You are the toughest woman I have ever met in my life, Genevieve," he said quietly, his tone hovering somewhere between absolute horror and deep admiration. "I wish you had died. Jesus Christ, are you okay?" I looked out the window. The sun was still shining. Completely indifferent to my domestic tragedy, a bird landed on a branch of the oak tree in the garden, singing happily. "I'm fine, Arthur," I lied, even as a single treacherous tear slipped down my cheek. She said exactly what she felt, and I did exactly what I had to do. Now all we can do is wait and see if the tree I planted crooked finally straightens out, or if it snaps in the wind. "And what if she snaps?" he asked, sliding the heavy documents back into his battered briefcase. "Then I'll know I failed 40 years ago. Not today," I replied, wiping the tear away with the back of my hand. "But for the first time in my life, Arthur, I am not her ATM. I am her mother, and mothers teach you how to survive, even if the lesson hurts like hell." Arthur gave my shoulder a heavy squeeze and walked out, leaving me completely alone in my empty fortress. I sat there for hours, listening to the ticking of the clock, thinking about my daughter. I imagined her walking back into the penthouse that no longer belonged to her. I imagined her panic when she opened the empty refrigerator. I imagined her crushing loneliness, so identical to the loneliness I felt in that cab in the pouring rain. It had been the hardest hit I had ever taken in my life. I had completely shattered my relationship with my only child. I had heard my own daughter say she wished I was dead, and yet, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, I felt something incredibly strange blooming in my chest. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't regret, it was dignity. I had taken my life back. I had taken my respect back. And even though the price was absolutely devastating, I knew deep in my bones that I had made the right call. Lauren's soap opera was over. The credits had rolled. Now, standing in the harsh light of reality, it was finally time for her to write her own script. Without my pen and without my checkbook. And I would be right here, waiting, praying, that by the end of this chapter, she would finally discover that she is capable of being something more than just Genevieve's daughter. I stood up, smoothed out my slacks, and walked toward the kitchen. I was starving. I was going to make myself something to eat, something simple, and for the first time in years, the food was going to taste like freedom. The days following Lauren's explosive exit were defined by a graveyard silence, a silence so thick you could practically chew it. The house, already massive and empty, seemed to expand overnight as if the walls were actively backing away to leave me more isolated with my own thoughts. And yet, for the first time in decades, that isolation didn't crush me. It wasn't the hollow ache of being abandoned. It was the clean, open space of having finally taken out the trash. During those first few weeks, my deeply ingrained maternal instincts woke me up multiple times in the dead of night. I'd find my hand hovering over the phone, fully prepared to wire her money, to check if she was eating, to make sure the world hadn't completely swallowed her whole. But every single time my fingertips brushed the cold plastic of the receiver, I heard her voice wishing me dead. I heard the rain hammering the roof of that cab, and I yanked my hand back like the phone was on fire. I did not cave. Arthur kept me updated with the ruthless efficiency of a wartime general. Lauren tried to sell the designer furniture in the penthouse, but the lease agreement and the building's security staff shut her down instantly. She tried taking out personal loans, but her credit history was a ghost town. To the banks, she simply didn't exist without my signature backing her. Her friends, those high society women who gladly drank her champagne and laughed at her jokes, evaporated the absolute second they realized the black card was dead. When day 30 hit, the hard deadline for the eviction, there was zero resistance. Arthur told me Lauren walked out of the luxury high-rise with 2 large suitcases and a single cardboard box. She left behind the custom furniture, the imported lighting fixtures, and the entire fantasy life. She dropped the keys at the concierge desk without uttering a single word, her eyes swollen shut, her pride completely pulverized. She didn't take the warehouse job. She dropped entirely off the radar. Arthur eventually tracked her down. She was crashing on the couch of an old college roommate she hadn't spoken to in years, out in a middle-class suburb on the edge of the city. That night, sitting in my garden with a heavy glass of red wine, I cried. I cried for the little girl sleeping on a stranger's sofa. But I also raised my glass to the woman who, for the very first time in her life, was sleeping in a bed that reality had provided, even if it was borrowed and uncomfortable. I knew hunger was a brutal teacher, but it is the only teacher that never lies. 3 months went by. 3 months where I actively focused on putting myself back together. I started swimming again, something I had given up years ago because I never had the time. I picked up my French lessons, and I tracked down Ethan, the young nurse who had helped me on that terrible night. Not to hire him as a caretaker, but to properly thank him. I paid for the advanced geriatric specialization program he had been dreaming of. Watching his genuine, overwhelming gratitude, his eyes welling up over a gift that came with absolutely zero strings attached, only confirmed how deeply toxic my relationship with my own daughter had become. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, I got the phone call I had been both dreading and praying for. It was Carl, the manager at the North Warehouse. "Ms. Genevieve," he said, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "I have someone sitting in my office right now. She says she has an open job offer." My heart slammed violently against my ribs. "Who is it, Carl?" It's your daughter, ma'am." But I barely recognized her. "She's lost a lot of weight, and she's wearing thrift store clothes." I squeezed my eyes shut and took a massive, deep breath. The air hit my lungs clean and sharp. "You treat her exactly like you would any other applicant, Carl," I instructed, my voice unwavering even though my insides were shaking. "If she meets the physical requirements and passes the drug test, you hire her. Same base pay, same rules. If she clocks in 1 minute late, you dock her pay for the day. Do you understand me?" "Understood, boss." "But you don't want to talk to her?" "No. She isn't there to talk to her mother. She's there to talk to her employer." Lauren took the job. For the next 6 months, my life devolved into a quiet espionage operation. Carl sent me weekly status reports, not out of favoritism, but simply because I needed proof of life. Those early reports were brutal to read. Clocked in late twice, formal warning issued, complained aggressively about the heat on the loading dock, dropped a crate of ceramics because she refused to wear the safety gloves, damages deducted from her paycheck. Every single bullet point felt like a knife to the gut, but I held my ground. I didn't intervene. I didn't soften the blow. I let the machine chew her up. But by the 4th month, the tone of the reports shifted. Arriving 15 minutes early to prep her inventory route, has completely stopped complaining. Stayed late to help a new hire understand the barcode system. And then came the report that actually made me smile for the first time in nearly a year. Requested overtime shifts to cover the deposit on a studio apartment near the facility. My daughter, the princess of the Fifth Avenue penthouse, was renting a shoebox near the industrial park and begging for overtime. Something inside her had finally shattered. Yes, but what was growing in the cracks was infinitely stronger than her old pride. It was dignity. I decided it was time. I didn't call her. I just drove down to the warehouse on a Friday afternoon, right at shift change. I parked my car far away so I wouldn't intimidate anyone, and I stood waiting by the employee exit gate. The sun was beating down hard, illuminating the thick dust hanging in the air. The crew started pouring out, laughing, exhausted, their hands stained black with grease, their foreheads shining with sweat, and right in the middle of the pack, I saw her. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, uneven ponytail. No trace of an expensive blowout. She was wearing faded denim, steel-toed boots, and a gray t-shirt with my company's logo plastered across the chest. She had zero makeup on. She looked older, rougher, weathered, but she walked with a grounded, heavy firmness I had never ever seen when she was balancing on those red-soled heels. She spotted me. She stopped dead in her tracks about 10 feet away. Her coworkers filed past her, yelling out, "See ya Monday, Lo!" She gave them a distracted nod, never once taking her eyes off me. The air between us cracked with electrical tension. I searched her face for the pure venom from that last morning in my office. I looked for the resentment, but all I found was deep exhaustion and a bizarre, quiet serenity. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice sounded different, deeper, grounded, none of that high-pitched whining. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets so she couldn't see them shaking. "Are you hungry?" Lauren looked down at her scuffed work boots, then looked me dead in the eye. "I am starving, but I don't have the money to eat where you eat. And today is payday, but I have to set it aside for rent." "Doesn't matter," I said. "I know a place right around the corner. A street taco truck. They're good." A ghost of a smile, ironic, heavy with history, crossed her face. Street tacos. Wow, things really have changed. We walked over to the food truck. We sat on cheap plastic stools right on the sidewalk, surrounded by the roar of rush hour traffic and the sharp smell of roasted salsa. Me in my tailored silk suit, her in her dust-covered work clothes. People stared at us, but I couldn't have cared less. We ate in total silence for a few minutes. She inhaled 3 tacos with a ravenous, aggressive appetite. None of that delicate, picky nibbling she used to do over plates of lobster. "Carl tells me you're getting pretty good at running the inventory lines," I said, breaking the ice as I wiped my mouth with a cheap paper napkin. "It's just basic logic," she said, giving a half shrug. "It's incredibly boring, but it pays the bills. Do you hate me?" The question forced its way out of my mouth before my brain could stop it. Lauren set her soda down on the metal table. She looked at me, and I saw a totally new depth in her eyes, a maturity forged by taking heavy hits. "I hated you," she admitted, totally deadpan. "I hated you when they turned me away from the women's shelter. I hated you when I had to pawn my jewelry for absolute pennies. I hated you my first week at the warehouse, when my feet were covered in blisters and I locked myself in the bathroom to cry." She paused, watching the cars fly by on the avenue. "But last week something happened. A pipe burst in my studio. The whole place flooded. A year ago, I would have called you screaming, demanding you send a plumber and book me a hotel room. This time, I found the shutoff valve. I mopped up the water. I pulled up a YouTube tutorial, and I replaced the gasket myself. It cost me $15. She looked back at me, and her eyes were shining. When I finished, I sat down on the wet linoleum floor, and Mom, I felt powerful. I felt capable. I didn't owe a single favor to anyone. I slept like a rock that night. So, no, Mom, I don't hate you anymore. I am still angry, and it still hurts that you threw me straight to the wolves. But I think I finally understand why you did it." A knot formed in my throat, so massive I thought it was going to choke me out. I reached my hand across the metal table. After a split second of hesitation, she placed her hand on top of mine. Her skin was rough, there was a thick callus on her palm, and one of her nails was cracked down the middle. I had never felt a more beautiful hand in my entire life. "The show is over, Lauren," I whispered. "Yeah," she said, gently pulling her hand back. "The show is over. Now I'm living the documentary. It's a hell of a lot harder, but at least it's real." She paid for her half of the food. She pulled out a frayed canvas wallet, carefully counted out the exact change, and set the coins on the table. "I cover my own end," she said, her chin lifting slightly. "I don't want to owe you anything." "Fair enough," I agreed, putting my cash away. "Thank you for the company. I need to get going. I clock in at 7 tomorrow, and the bus takes forever." She stood up, hoisted her heavy backpack over her shoulder, and leaned down to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. She smelled like sweat and cheap bar soap, but to me, she smelled like pure hope. "Bye, Mom. Maybe I'll see you next month, once I save up enough to treat you." I watched her walk away toward the bus stop, her back perfectly straight, her head held high. She was no longer the sophisticated illusion I had purchased with a credit card. She was a woman under construction, built entirely by her own two hands. I drove back to my house, my sanctuary. I slept that night with a profound peace I had never known existed. It has been 2 years since that afternoon. Lauren never set foot in the Fifth Avenue penthouse again. I sold that apartment and used the money to create an investment fund for older women who, like me, find themselves alone and need to reinvent their lives. Lauren still works at the company, but she doesn't carry boxes anymore. She worked her way up to logistics supervisor entirely on her own merit. She earns every single dime on her paycheck. She lives in a small but decent apartment that she pays for herself. She drives a used sedan she bought on a payment plan. Our relationship isn't perfect. We are not best friends who go shopping and gossip over mimosas. There are deep scars. There is a very respectful distance between us. A perimeter where she fiercely guards her independence, and I strictly respect her boundaries. But when we meet for lunch once a month, we talk about real things. We talk about the economy, about the supply chain, about life. We don't talk about soap operas anymore. I have changed too. I stepped down from the day-to-day operations of the company, and I travel. I explored Patagonia. I walked the quiet streets of Kyoto. I learned how to dance the tango in Buenos Aires. I discovered that hitting your 70s isn't the epilogue of your life. It's a vibrant, completely new chapter, as long as you aren't dragging around dead weight that doesn't belong to you. Sometimes, when it rains hard and I watch the water violently hitting the glass, I think back to that night in the hospital. I remember the sharp, stabbing pain of feeling completely disposable. But then I smile, because that storm didn't just soak me to the bone. It watered the dead, dry earth where my daughter had been planted. It was a necessary hurricane. I have learned that a mother's love isn't always a soft embrace or a blank check. Sometimes, the most profound, agonizing act of love you can commit is locking the door, hiding your wallet, and forcing your children to stand out in the storm. Because it is only out there, freezing in the rain, that you truly learn the value of a roof. And it is only when the ground is ripped out from under your feet that you finally discover you have wings. My name is Genevieve. I am 70 years old, and finally, both my daughter and I are completely free.